What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Top 5 breakout running backs for the 2020 season. We're going over 5 running backs today that have a path to a breakout season, and I also think are really good picks for you can get them. So these aren't guys who could definitely break out, but I don't love the value on. I think all of them are also really good picks. Remember that our draft package is live and is always being updated, and I actually added offensive line rankings on Sunday, I believe. So if you got the package, definitely go check that out because that's something that is new, hasn't been there before, and it's thefantasyfootballadvice.com. So let's start things off, as always, with the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was which quarterback threw the most interceptions inside the 10-yard line. The answer was Baker Mayfield with 3. The winner was Bailey Kim. Today's stat: which quarterback led the league in yards per carry on third down? All right, let's go over Derrius Guice first. Running back 31, early 8th round on average. And that ADP does not make a whole lot of sense to me because you're effectively eliminating all of the risk by taking him that late. I mean, at this point, it means you've taken 7 players before that, and given our general strategy, you probably have taken 4 running backs and 3 wide receivers, meaning Guice would be your running back 5. And someone needs to explain to me the risk in taking Guice as like your running back 4 or 5. Let's say you took 3 running backs and then 4 wide receivers, and then in the 8th round, you went with running back again to even it out. So he's your running back 4. There's just no risk at that point. I mean, if you were taking him in the 4th or 5th round, well, now I get it because I said avoid risk. Through the first 4 rounds, definitely 5th round, maybe a little bit, but that's kind of where the drop-off starts to happen. But the 8th round, I mean, we don't even want safe players, right? Like if someone's safe in the 8th round at running back, I don't want them because that probably means they have absolutely no upside. I want to assume as much risk as possible in this range because I know they're going that late because they're risky. But if I don't care, it means I'm capturing upside. I mean, think about Dalvin Cook last year. People were really concerned because he tore his ACL as a rookie. He missed a long time in his second season with like a major hamstring injury. And so they're like, wow, that's an extremely risky pick. But he was going 13th overall. Now, Guice is more risky because both injuries were his knee. You know, it was only one knee injury for Dalvin Cook. But Guice isn't going 13th overall, right? He's going 84th overall. So what's the problem with that? I mean, if you want to make a case against Guice, the only things you can really say are mediocre quarterback play and just a trash offensive line. Maybe, just maybe you could say Peterson and Love might take some carries. I think that's extremely thin. I think the only things you can really say are quarterback and offensive line. But don't believe anyone who says, oh, it's because we don't know if he's good. We know he's good. We know he's a very, very talented player, and if he gets a ton of touches, he's going to crush, right? He's got just that perfect skill set to where he can produce in this situation, right? Because if he was a guy who excels on just consistently getting you like 4 or 5 yards, but he's got a bad quarterback, so they're not going to score many touchdowns, and he's got a bad offensive line, so they're not really creating any yards for him, that's a problem. But that's not who Guice is. He's a guy who maybe he gets stuffed a lot, and he's only getting, let's say, 17 carries, 12 of them he's getting stuffed for. But he only needs 1 hole to bust a 40-yard touchdown. That's the talent he has, and those are the players we're targeting. Because if they can open up a few holes for him each game, he's going to have a ton of upside. And also, he's pretty young. I mean, he was a very young rookie. He just turned 23 years old. So he's younger than Barkley. He's younger than Miles Sanders. And one thing that really frustrates me when people talk about Guice is they'll point to the games missed, which obviously is a problem because he suffered these injuries and we know that they're long-term, and pointing to games missed is like, yeah, these are long-term major injuries, right? But you can't use the logic of these are bad injuries and then not use it for other players because there are plenty of other players who have suffered major injuries who have just missed less time because the injuries happen at the end of the season. I mean, think Chris Carson. Do you know how many injuries Chris Carson has suffered? I mean, multiple knee, ankle fracture, hip fracture, multiple shoulder injuries. Like, this dude never, ever stays healthy for a full season, but he's been lucky because a lot of his injuries have happened at the end of the season, so he hasn't missed all that much time. Guice has been extremely unlucky on the other end because both of his injuries have happened to start the season. But think about a guy going in the same range as Guice, like Kerryon Johnson. Okay, he's also suffered 2 knee injuries in his first 2 seasons. The only difference is that Johnson is competing with DeAndre Swift, whereas Guice is competing with a 90-year-old Adrian Peterson. Antonio Gibson has like 4 career touches, and Bryce Love, who also has a ton of injury concerns, and we don't really know how good he is. We know that Guice is incredible if they give him the workload, and he just doesn't have that much competition. So if all you're fading is an injury in the 8th round, that's absurdly good value and an incredible use of draft capital. There is not that much opportunity cost in the 8th round to take a shot on a player who has this sort of upside. So I think it's just an incredible pick. Darrell Henderson, I also think, is a really nice pick because we don't know. I mean, we don't know what that split is going to be. No one does. If you hear someone come out before actual reports, like if they are actually reporting it's going to be 60-40 some way, well, then we can start to think that. But there's been nothing. No one from that team, that organization, has come out and said, this is what the split's going to be, to where we can actually trust it. You know, where it's a reputable source saying this is what it's going to be. And since that's the case, why is Henderson going in the late 10th to early 11th round? I know he was bad last year, but a ton of people speculated he would need a year to learn the Rams blocking scheme. A lot of people thought that. And so you look at his end of season numbers, they're not good. But it's such a small sample size that throw that out. Not throw out what he did, but don't let anyone be like, oh, the yards per carry are low. Like, he had like 5 touches. Like, he didn't play very much last year. Don't look at yards per carry after contact, none of that stuff, okay? Let's just look at the opportunity. Gurley's leaving behind 254 touches. And we know for a fact that Akers is not taking all that, right? They don't draft Akers to just throw him into the Gurley role. The market seems to assume that Akers is going to step in and get a lot of them. Obviously not all, but a lot of them. But I'm not convinced that he is better than Henderson. The market seems to be convinced of that, but I'm not. You know, he was pretty bad on his goal line carries last season. He faced an extremely easy schedule and barely did better than an average running back against that schedule. Meanwhile, you look at what Henderson did in college. I mean, he was like the most efficient running back in college football history. Now, I'm not saying he was the best because his competition wasn't as good, but he was incredible. And he was busting out these like 90-yard touchdown runs on like every other carry. I mean, obviously that's an exaggeration, but he was extremely good in college. Go look at his college numbers. They're very good. Akers aren't that impressive. And to think that Akers is going to step in when Henderson has had a year in the NFL to learn this scheme, Akers is going to come in less than 2 months. I mean, rookies are just reporting. It is mid-July, and the season starts in early September. He does not have that long to learn this scheme, and there's going to be, a maximum of 1 preseason game, but in all likelihood, 0 preseason games? And you think he's going to come in and usurp, is that the right word? Whatever the word I should have used there. He's going to come in and just completely take over Henderson? Probably not. I don't think he's talented enough to do that, and I think people are underestimating the talent of Henderson. So what else are you going to do with your 10th round pick other than potentially take the top running back on the Rams? I'm cool doing that because, again, it's the 10th round. You've got like a 1 in 4 chance of hitting on a start-worthy player anyways. Why not take the upside of Henderson? Next up, my boy, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, going as a running back 17, which is like roughly the mid-3rd round on a 12-team league. And I have seen some people recently compare Clyde to Darwin Thompson, and it was a genuine shock to me to see those comments. I didn't think I'd have to go over this, but here we are. So These two players are not even remotely comparable. You've got Darwin Thompson on one end. He was not really recruited at all out of high school. He played mostly at junior college. He played one season in the Mountain West. He was taken 214th overall. All of his hype did not come from the draft. His hype came from a few nice preseason runs, which we know is something we shouldn't be doing. We know is something that happens every year, but we try and avoid that, right? We see a guy just crush it in a few runs. It's a little easier to buy into the hype when he's on the Chiefs, but if a guy on just a terrible offense, like the Jaguars, like if a backup on the Jaguars has a few nice runs, usually they don't get too much hype. But when someone on the Chiefs does it, you're like, ooh, maybe I should take him as a flyer late just for that upside, right? So you kind of get it. With Clyde, he was the featured back on LSU in their national championship run, and then he was taken 32nd overall. Those two things are quite different. You've got 214th overall from one season in the Mountain West versus 32nd overall featured back on a national championship team. A little bit different, right? And you look at the skill set of Clyde, he's great on the ground, but he really shines in pass protection and in the receiving game. Do you think they would take a player like that in the first round after Patrick Mahomes specifically requested him and then start that player on the bench behind Damian Williams? I mean, you crazy? That's not going to happen, right? I mean, Clyde is probably going to be a top 5 pick next season. So getting him as your running back 3 is incredible because that allows you to just crush running back, hammer wide receiver in the best rounds for wide receiver. I mean, you could start off like Kamara or Zeke, then Miles Sanders, then Clyde, potentially grab 3 top 7 running backs, but easily grab 3 running back ones, dominate running back, and then just hammer wide receiver in rounds 3, 4, 5, 6, getting guys that are incredible and have a ton of upside. So I think Clyde is an exceptional pick in the 3rd round. If he starts to climb into the early 2nd round, that's probably where I pump the brakes because while I think he'll return that value, there is a little bit more risk at that range than there is in the mid-3rd. Because once you hit the mid-3rd, you're outside of that tier of that like 1st and 2nd tier, I guess for me, running backs. You start getting to the 3rd tier, and at that point, it's great. But as soon as you get into the late 1st round and into the early 2nd round, I still prefer guys like Drake, like Miles Sanders, like Josh Jacobs. But I think Clyde is right there at the end of that, but he's not being taken there. He's being taken a round later, which is awesome value because you can get 2 insanely safe running backs ahead of him. So I like Clyde. Hope you like Clyde, and really hope that they feature him because, oh my goodness, he could absolutely dominate if they give him the majority of snaps. Next guy up, David Montgomery. You guys have heard my Montgomery take a lot recently, so I'm only going to go over the highlights here. But he's definitely positioned for a breakout season. Will it happen? I don't know. But he's in position to break out. His ADP basically hasn't been moving from like the late 5th to early 6th round. I really think it's stabilized. I mean, at this point, I don't see him ever going in the 7th. I do not see him climbing into the 4th round unless, I guess if Cohen got hurt, he'd probably climb a little bit further. He definitely would. He'd probably climb to the 3rd round if Cohen got hurt. But assuming Cohen stays healthy, I think he's stabilized in that like 5th, 6th round range. But to me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because he had 267 touches as a rookie. And of recording this, they haven't traded for anyone, so he's competing with Ryan Nall and Napoleon Maxwell for carries. Okay, you think they're giving Napoleon Maxwell carries over David Montgomery? No, they're not. So, and assuming, honestly, this team did any research in the offseason, they're going to see that they need to expand his receiving game role because Cohen was dreadful. And teams know that when Cohen's on the field and Montgomery's on the bench, they're passing. They're not giving the ball to Cohen in the running game. So why would you do that? If Montgomery is also more efficient in the passing game and teams can't sell out to stop the pass, why would you take him off the field for Cohen? It doesn't make any sense. Now, will they do the research? I don't know, but they should. But overall, I just think he's being taken at his floor, right? Last season was the worst case scenario. So as long as either Trubisky improves or they transition to Foles, they're going to score more than 17.5 points per game. Teams aren't consistently that bad when they have weapons. Like, you can be that bad if you have no one to throw to, no one in the running game. But Cohen and Montgomery are decently talented. Their offensive line is okay. And Anthony Miller and Allen Robinson are pretty good. So it was only the quarterback play last season, and I really believe they're going to transition into Foles if Trubisky doesn't step it up. So minimum, they're going to be better, and that's obviously going to help Montgomery. So I think he's a great pick and position to do well this season. Last player is J.K. Dobbins, being taken in the mid to late 8th round, although I have seen him slip further than that as the running back 34 on average. And if we're looking for a breakout in this range, then he basically checks every single box except for being the starter. But like, if he was the starter, he wouldn't be going in this range. So the only box he doesn't check is that he's a backup. But he's probably still going to get in that 130 to 150 touch range. And that's assuming that they don't shift the workload to him. Now, I do believe that that's going to happen. I do believe that he's going to be in 130 to 150 touches, that they're still going to use Ingram as the lead guy, and that next season, Dobbins is the featured back. I think that's the most likely outcome. But he is talented enough to take over earlier than that, and he's talented enough to where if Ingram suffers, say, a high ankle sprain, so he misses 4 to 6 weeks, then they look at Dobbins and they're like, this dude is incredible, he's doing awesome, let's just stick with him. So I think that could happen. What I want to point out is that this is not a situation like Hill last season. Last season, Hill was a pass-catching specialist, and they took him in the mid-4th round. And we knew he was never going to overtake Ingram. The thing we were talking about with Hill was we don't know fully what that offense, or we didn't know what that offense was going to do in the passing game to running backs. We knew that it's less likely that a supremely mobile quarterback was going to throw a lot of dump-offs, right? You've got a guy like Lamar Jackson. He is not going to throw a lot of dumps. He's just going to run the ball in that area. So we looked at Hill and we said, he's really good in the receiving game. That's going to hurt Ingram's upside because not only are they going to throw the ball less to running backs, they're probably going to throw to Hill. And we were sort of right, but we were right in the sense that they threw 3.2 targets per game to a combination of Ingram, Hill, and Gus Edwards. All those dudes combined, 3.2 targets per game. So that combined is Royce Freeman. So if you want a comparison, divide Royce Freeman's targets into 3 and then section that off into Hill, Gus, and Ingram. So we were right in that sense. Hill did have a receiving game role, but he wasn't really taking early down, so it didn't affect Ingram all that much since overall volume in the receiving game was already low. But Dobbins is different. Dobbins isn't stepping in and taking the receiving role. He's stepping in and taking the early down role. They took this kid in the 2nd round after rating him as a first-round talent. Maybe they would have taken him in the 1st round, but they got an incredible value with their 1st-round pick. And obviously, you'd like to get people later than what you have them ranked. But they got great value in the 1st round, and then they were just ecstatic that he fell to them in the 2nd round. But while he's capable, fully capable of being a 3-down back, at the very least, he's a much bigger threat to the early down work than Hill was. So I just wanted to point that out. Very different players. Hill, receiving game specialist, going to take receiving snaps. But since they didn't have very many of those, that kind of goes away. You have Dobbins, a threat to the receiving role, but definitely a threat to the early down role. And remember, this is an offense where we actually don't care that much about the receptions because no one's going to have that many. What we want on this offense is the carries, and hopefully they keep him in some goal line situations. Because you combine Ingram and Gus last season, they were given 202 and 133 carries respectively. I believe it was respectively. Ingram with the 202, 133 for Gus. That combined for over 1,700 rushing yards and 12 rushing touchdowns at over 5.1 yards per carry. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that Gus and Ingram are bad running backs, but I will say you do not need to be that talented at running back to be extremely efficient in this offense. This is an offense that is going to be top 5 in scoring. They are probably going to rank first in overall rushing. They are probably going to be top 3 in rushing efficiency. They're going to be top 5 to 7 in how good their offensive line is at the end of the day. And realistically, you got to think Ingram is really the only competition. I know I said I don't want to say Gus is bad, but Gus Edwards is not an elite running back. So they're not benching Dobbins for Gus. They would never have taken him in the second round with his sort of skill set if they were like, yeah, let's use him as a running back 3. That doesn't make any sense for what they're trying to do. They want Ingram and Dobbins to be the 2 guys, and that's going to mean he's got a fairly clear path to 130 to 150 touches. And you can't say that about that many rookie running backs. And realistically, it's the best situation behind Clyde. I mean, being a running back on this offense is incredible. I don't care who you are, you're going to be efficient. So think about what that means. If he's got 130 touches, it's not that great. It's basically Gus Edwards last season. But if Ingram gets hurt for a few weeks, he's instantly a mid-range running back 1. And so you will be able to use him at points if Ingram stays healthy. I don't want you to think that he's a dud. 130 touches is still, 9 touches? That was quick math in my head, but around 9 touches a week. That's fine. But it's not going to be a guy you really want to start. You're keeping him on the bench as your 8th round pick because he wins you your league if Ingram gets hurt. That's what I want. So, those are my top 5 potential breakout running backs this season. If you want to see my favorite players to target across all positions, you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.